everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh. He's host of People Solve Problems, and we have special guest here, Chuck Wisner. Chuck, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me. And
Glad
nice to see you after all these years.
after all these years, we go back about 30 years now, I think,
Yes, yes.
and quite a long time, and was an influence on my life for sure with the work that you did at a couple of different companies I was at. So really appreciative
Mhm.
of that. So Chuck leads Wisner Consulting, is the author of The Art of Conscious Conversations, Transforming How We Talk, Listen, and Interact, which is, I can say, right up your alley in terms of content. He's been a leader and team advisor for Fortune 200 companies for the last 25 years and has an approach of better understanding of human dynamics in conversations. Um, so thanks for coming on. I got to benefit from your perspective and even process, right? Sort of helping me process things way back when. So I'm glad we
Yeah,
can share with other people through the podcast.
yeah, me too. Glad we're still here doing it.
Yes, glad we're still here doing it for certain. So
Yeah,
in that time, you've seen a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly. To use
yeah.
one of my favorite movies. Can you share an example maybe of bad problem solving or decision making that you've experienced, and maybe what you take away from that?
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about four types of conversations as a way, as a structure to hold all these ways that we can learn about conversations and change how we're in conversation. And one of the things I came up with while writing the book, well, actually with my clients, I call the conversational bypass. And what that really is we love telling our stories, and our egos love attaching to our stories, and we love going to action, which is the commitment, our commitment conversation, who's doing what by when, and how we make promises of one another. We love those two conversations, and we basically are addicted to them unconsciously. And so when you ask about bad problem solving, what we're missing by those two conversations are the middle two conversations, which are much more difficult and juicier because they're collaboration and creativity, right? And so we bypass those things. We're in a meeting. A bunch of people say, "Well, what are we here to do?" And some people, the loudest person in the room or the most, extrovert says, "La la 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 la." There's a bunch of opinions go around, and then someone says, "Okay, what are we going to do?" And that might be 10 minutes later, it might be 2 hours later, but we jump to what are we going to do? And so there's not this conscious effort to say, "Wait a minute, there are different ways to look at this. There are different possibilities to solve the problem." you know and so it's that leap to wanting to take action that often then people have to revisit their decision. And
Okay.
it's also a huge leadership trap because the leaders think they should have the answer,
Hmm.
and so they fall into that trap of having to be the knower, as we probably talked about 30 years ago. And so for leaders to understand that they can have, in fact, the higher you get in the ladder, the less likely you have all the answers.
Right.
So So I've seen this play out at teams, and interconnected teams where they just can't work together because they're just lost in the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I have to acknowledge I'm addicted to my stories, as anybody that knows me. Hard to get through a conversation without a story at some point. So, uh,
yeah,
and I write about, in my book, I write a lot about collaboration and creativity as two key capabilities for problem solving. Um, Now, in a lot of places, we either use structure of problem solving to avoid the bypass or encourage. I like the word bypass, right? So I. Uh,
yeah,
to help encourage us to avoid the bypass, or we might pull a facilitator in to just make sure we don't bypass it. And so, but those are, either clunky or invasive solutions. So
yes,
what are some of your, I don't know, tips or tricks or just advice for avoiding the bypass?
yeah. So let's see. There's two ways we can talk. We can talk about it from an individual point of view. What can we do as individuals to be comfortable with the collaborative conversation and the creative conversation? because they both they're both very, you have to be willing to put your ego aside, put your perspective aside, go from a closed fist to an open fist to say, here's my thinking. So what can we do as individuals to be better collaborators, and invite people into that dance? And then there's the group dynamic or the community dynamic. It's like, what do we need to do as a group? And often that comes to the leader to say, let's take the extra half hour to hear all the perspectives in the room. No judgment, no bickering. It's just like, what do we think? What are the different ways we're thinking about this? And I actually have four tips that I use, or four elements that I tell people to keep on a little sticky note. Right? It's like, because every judgment we have or every opinion we have desires and goals, and all of these four have good and bad components. We have concerns about the future. There's always authority issues, power plays that are playing out, egos that are playing out. And then there's standards. What standards are we making our judgment based on? And so that is one way of not giving up your perspective, but sharing the thinking under your perspective. Here's my concern. My standard says that good would look like this, or a boss shouldn't behave like that, or whatever. So I think that collective meeting someone has to say, let's take the time to have that dialogue. Right? And if we have that dialogue in a really open way, where I'm learning from you and you're learning from me, and I go, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. That's when ideas start bubbling up. That's when the creative conversation almost just sort of takes a life of its own, and possibilities emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the individual has a responsibility, but as in meetings and groups, we have a responsibility to say, let's take the time.
Yeah. So I like the two approaches. And, you introduce the idea of learning, right? What are we going to learn from each other in that conversation? So, we feel like the goal is to make a decision, and at some point, yes, it is. So taking the time to have the conversation feels like unproductive time, right? Because we're not
right
to that decision. But not the byproduct, but the product of that conversation is the learning.
Yeah.
And so how do you ensure there's taking the time, and then there's getting the learning out of it, right? Getting the result out of it. How do you ensure or just increase the probability that learning is at the center of a conversation like that?
Yeah. So the learning happens when we as individuals can set our judgments aside. When we have an opinion, and I don't want to take anyone's opinions away, but I want them to reveal the thinking under their opinion. But often when we have a strong opinion that we're holding with a fist, it comes with a lot of judgments. It'll never work that way, or he's full of crap, or she's not leading us in the right direction, or whatever it is. So unless we can put our judgment aside and our private conversation aside, right, we can't listen. We can't absorb the other person's position to have that aha moment that says, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. Or, oh, we have different standards. Let's explore that, because maybe your standard is better than my standard. So I think it's that ability to sort of like set it aside, and every individual has that job to investigate their own pattern.
Right.
Right.
So the importance of that, is critical to that conversation. So let me just test a little further on that. I'm going to throw in a really weird movie quote. Seems like a weird drop in, but it's from the movie The Matrix. And the quote is, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
Yeah.
And so here's the question I want to get to. Do people have to be self-aware that they're putting their judgment aside? Or is there a way to get people to put their judgment aside without even being aware they're doing it?
I think both. And I think first, you can ask someone, okay, look, I know this feels really difficult for you to set your position aside because you really feel strongly about it. But if you can sit that aside for a minute, how would that change how you listen? How would that change how you absorb what the other person is saying and even how you feel, right? So we can sort of like ask people to do that. And then the other piece is, of course, if they get a taste of that, then they have a glimmer of awareness. Then they go, oh, I can do that. And even their emotional triggers, even some of their stress they live in can disappear because they're becoming more aware of the automatic patterns that they live in, you
Yeah.
know. And I like calling them patterns that we have around conversations or interactions because it's a little less judgmental than a habit, you know.
Yeah.
You know, we develop these patterns. Most of our patterns and around conversations and how we interact and our triggers, we didn't even choose. They come from our upbringing and our family and our education and and so if we can look at them non-judgmentally and go, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
I had a pattern when my kids were young and they would get over rambunctious. I had two boys. They would get over rambunctious. My wife would get upset. And we'd say, settle down. And they wouldn't settle down. I would just lose it. I mean, I would just like start screaming and shut that up, and whether it was in the car or in the house. And when I started doing my work, right, like someone said, well, what's that trigger all about? What's that emotional trigger about? I realized that I was becoming my father. So my role model was my dad who did that. And so that's what I knew. So when things got out of hand, I became Charlie, right? and the beauty was that was a moment of awareness for me. And then I could let the kids know because I was willing to be humble enough to go, guess what, guys? Here's what's happening. I don't want to be that dad. I want to be this dad. But when I get triggered, Charlie shows up. That's not what I want. So then in the future, when things would get out of control, I would just have to say, Charlie, and everybody would calm down.
Yep.
So that was recognizing a pattern and then being willing to shift it.
Yeah. And I like the pattern language as well because it's not our identity, right? It's
Right.
just something we fall into or triggered into. And yeah, I would always teach about, a learner, be a learner, not a knower. But it's not like you're either one or the other. It's just each moment in time, you can be more of one than the other. So it's just about
Absolutely.
having your hand on the knob, right?
Yeah. Turn it down, turn it up.
Yeah,
Yeah. And sometimes you have to be the expert and be the knower.
yeah,
Right. I mean,
not inherently bad. It's just is your hand on that knob at the right time,
yeah, about the right thing.
and I like that
Yeah.
you kind of say basically you gave us sort of a nudge, right? It's not that you have to transform somebody's mindset. You kind of nudge them in that direction, and they become more self-aware. We all have that capacity, and
Yes.
just a little nudge, and it can move the conversation in the right direction.
Yeah. Sometimes if people, you give them a little like, hey, how would how would you feel differently if you just put your judgment aside and listened? Sometimes that feeling is, a little more heart body centric, and they go, oh, I'm more relaxed, or oh, I was able to listen better. That's a real invitation for people to go, I can do more of that. I'd like more of that. Yeah, yeah.
So we've talked quite a bit about the collaboration conversations and the barriers to that. Let's talk about the creativity side um,
Yeah.
a bit. And I'm particularly interested just because it's a an exploration topic for me about intuition and its relationship to creativity. How do you draw it in? How do you tap into it? How do you enable it either for yourself or for a team to help with that
Mm.
activity?
Yeah. So there's a couple components here. One is the intuitive component, and the other is the right brain, left brain component. We are so programmed to live in our left brain with our rational self, our literal decisions. Um, and the right brain is actually, in fact, Einstein called the right brain the master. The right brain is more contextual. Puts the pieces together, moves more slowly, says, wait a minute, do we understand everything that's going on? Right. And so I think we need to learn in the collaborative and especially the creative conversation. Do we give ourselves permission to dream, to wonder what else is possible?
Mhm.
Just that question, what is possible? You know, and because that's the opposite of resignation. Like, well, nothing will ever work. We're stuck here. But if we ask the question, what's the wonder? What's possible? That at least opens that up. So I think we have to embrace that right side of our brain and consciously ask the question so that we go there, right? Because we're so trained to go the other way. And then the intuitive side is really so personal because that is our own ability to listen to our inner voice, to listen to our inner wisdom or our awareness or whatever you want to call it. And that's a practice of really trusting our voices. Everything from, over the years, everything from, you're leaving a hotel room and there's a little voice that says, "Mm," and then you leave, but then you leave and you realize that you left your damn charger in the hotel room. Right? It's like, but that voice was there, but we didn't listen, right?
Yep.
And so that too is a practice to go, can I be more aware, more conscious of that? I have a couple acres of land and my wife and I love to garden. And one of my early practices was to do this, to trust my intuition or let just be in the flow of let life live through me.
Mhm.
I'd go out in the garden, but I wouldn't have a plan. It's not like I was going out to start my chainsaw or not was going out to weed or plant, or I was just going out because I wanted to be out on a beautiful day with land, getting my hands dirty. And sure enough, I go out and 5 minutes later, I'm doing something,
Mhm.
and I'm allowing that sort of natural, sort of intuitive thing to find something and then engage with it fully. So it's the least objective of the conversations to get a handle on and practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part for people is often realizing that it's not purely objective. It's not, you don't have a handle on it. You don't know where you end up by tapping
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah.
So your confidence that there's a return on investment essentially
Right.
is fairly low.
That, yes, right. Right. But then if you do practice a little bit, the satisfaction you get from whatever job you did that you didn't plan to do, there's a satisfaction and there's an immediate gratification, and so you can increase that practice by making sure you get that gratification.
Yeah, no,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think that's important, kind of recognizing, yeah, you had a flash of brilliance or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't an accident. You invested and created the space for that to come about.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we just have a minute left. We haven't talked much about your book, although that wasn't really the goal.
Right.
You gave us a brief outline. I'm curious, what's maybe a surprise or a new insight that you gained by the process of writing the book?
Oh, well, there's two things. One is it was a long journey for me, and it all started with, you remember Jamie Bonini,
Of course.
right? So it all started with Jamie and I were having a cocktail together many years ago, and he loved the work that we had done that you were part of. And he said, but I don't know how, there's so many tools. There's the ladder of inference, and there's this, and there's that, and there's emotional intelligence, but I don't know how to connect the dots. And that really stuck with me. And so literally that was soup in my brain probably for a year or two, until I realized I went back to my studies in language, when I studied language. And I went back and I realized that there are these four types of conversations that were perfect for holding all the different pieces together. So that structure became the glue because each conversation has individual tools and practices and patterns to change and things to look at.
Right.
So that was really great. And the other thing is when I started writing the book, I had a story that I couldn't write. So we're talking about storytelling. We all have good stories. We all have stories that don't serve us well. Well, I had a story that I couldn't write. And I'm still not a great writer, but I like to write and have more confidence. But I burned through a couple co-writers and editors until that didn't work. And I said, screw it. I'm going to write this damn thing myself, and I can write. So that's an example of busting a story that's not serving us well.
Right. I love that. And it took a couple false steps to get there. So,
Right.
Congratulations on getting there, and hope people pick up the book and learn from you as I've learned from you, and appreciate you sharing your insights on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.